The movie opens with a happy young couple in love who vowed eternal love to each other. They were Ig and Mary, and they had a relationship since they were children, and it is not known how much time passed, but when Ig woke up one morning, he saw that there were many people outside his house accusing him of being a murderer. Besides, the press was after him everywhere, even at his parents' house, who were trying to believe in his innocence, as well as his brother Terry and his lawyer Lee, who was also his best friend. At nightfall, we see how a group of people gathered at the place where Mary was murdered. They left offerings and prayed for her soul. Ig, who was hiding crying and drinking in the treehouse, managed to hear how Mary's father accused him of the murder. And when they all left, Ig, desperate, came down to destroy all the offerings left for Mary.
What?
But his presence did not go unnoticed, because a provocative woman who was flirting with him came back to cheer him up, and after getting him drunk, she managed to spend the night with him. The next day, Ig woke up and discovered that he had grown horns. He thought he was still drunk, but it was not his imagination, since the provocative woman who he spent the night with also saw them, and then she began to act in a rather strange way, revealing to him her most disturbing desires. Ig preferred to ignore her, but as the day wore on, he saw that the horns had a special power and brought out the worst in people, for everyone who approached Ig ended up telling him their dirtiest secrets. Ig, worried about what was happening, went to the doctor to have his horns removed, and while he was under anesthesia, he remembered the magical day he met Mary. They were both in church and she used her cross to reflect the sunlight, thus attracting Ig's attention, and when Mary left, he saw that she had forgotten her cross, so he picked it up to give it to her a few days later, and from that moment on, they became inseparable. One afternoon, Ig took her to the treehouse we saw earlier, where Mary confessed to him that she had left her cross behind on purpose for him to find it, so they would have an excuse to get to know each other. After telling him, Mary kissed him tenderly. The next thing Ig remembered, the two of them, now grown up, were still just as much in love. When the anesthesia wore off, Ig woke up and saw that he still had his horns. So he went to his best friend Lee for help. For some strange reason, he was the only one who didn't see them, probably because he was such a good person. So, Ig went to his parents' house, who did see his horns, and even seemed to be influenced by his power. At first, Ig's mother confessed to him that he was unhappy and asked him to stay away, as she didn't want him to be her son or to make her life miserable. Then, Ig went to his father and discovered that his progenitor, instead of helping him, believed that he was to blame for what happened to Mary. Now Ig confirmed his theory. Horns had power over the people and made them confess their most disturbing secrets of their souls. As Ig was desperate and could not get rid of the horns, he decided to use them in his favor, to make the real murderer confess his crime, since his case was getting even more complicated, as a waitress who served him and Mary the night of the murder had decided to testify against him. Suddenly, Ig found the ring with which he was going to propose to his beloved, and remembered that that night he arrived very excited for his date. But before he could declare his love, Mary decided to break up with him because she no longer loved him, and even though Ig begged her to stay with him, she left, and that would be the last time we saw her alive, since the following morning, Ig woke up wasted, and from that moment on, everything became a nightmare, as the police began to interrogate him for the crime. Ig went in search for the waitress, and with the help of the power of his horns, he discovered that everything she declared against him was a lie, because she was only looking for headlines and fame. Then Ig went to his brother Terry to tell him what was going on, and discovered that the night Mary died, they left together. So Ig started to hit him for having kept that important information for so long, and when he grabbed him by the neck, he discovered that during that fateful night, he was in his car with Mary, and since he was so wasted, he started to flirt with her, so she got out of the car in the middle of the forest. And the next thing Terry remembered was walking up next to a bloody stone. So very alarmed, he started looking for Mary and found her dead. So nervous, Terry got rid of the evidence. Ig was furious and kept punching him until the police arrived and arrested him for the disturbance. The next day, Lee went with the police and managed to get him out of jail. But Ig's gratitude ended when he discovered that he was wearing Mary's cross. Now, Ig seemed to understand everything. The two of them were lovers, and he was the reason Mary left him. In his defense, Lee only told him that there were things about Mary that he didn't know, and then Ike left, as he didn't want to hear another word. Later, Ike went to Mary's father to get more information about his daughter. However, this guy didn't even want to see him and kicked him out of his house. Ike, who had been betrayed by his family and his best friend, was now alone and totally unhinged, trying to get rid of the horns as he didn't want to hear any more disturbing secrets from anyone. But before he could succeed, he was interrupted snakes that, instead of attacking him, seemed to obey him, and even brought a very sharp pitchfork close to him. From that moment on, Ike felt a strong desire for revenge come over him. So the first step was to go with his new subjects in search of the waitress to take revenge. The next step was to approach his brother Terry to tell him how much he hated him, since he never helped him, neither when he was called to testify, nor when he found Mary dead in the middle of the forest. Terry tried to justify himself by saying that he didn't talk before for fear of being framed, but Ike, who was out of his mind, wouldn't listen to reason and forced him to get high to make him feel all the pain and suffering that Mary went through. And his revenge would not be complete if he did not lash out at Mary's lover, his friend Lee. So after asking him not to be her lawyer anymore, Ike ripped off Mary's cross, which was his only protection, because now Lee could see the horns. Then they began to brutally beat each other, and when Ike grabbed him by the neck, he got to see what really happened. Mary had told Lee that she couldn't marry Ike because some things were happening to him, and later, Lee, who was obsessed with Mary, followed her to the forest because he had misunderstood things and thought that she abandoned Ike so that they two could be together. But when he tried to kiss her, she rejected him, telling him that she loved Ike, and it was Lee himself who admitted to Ike how he made her his, and then to avoid being betrayed, he killed her with a stone, which he placed in Terry's vehicle to incriminate him. After this horrible confession, both continued fighting, and the coward Lee defeated Ike, beating him with a chain without giving him the option to defend himself. Then, Lee put him into his vehicle and fueled him with gasoline, and while he set him on fire, he told him that as his lawyer, he would tell how Ike had confessed to being the author of Mary's murder before committing suicide. Everything seemed to indicate that Ike had died, but all of a sudden we can see that he managed to survive, and so, all disfigured and burned, he decided to look for Mary's father to tell him that he knew the real murderer of his daughter and that he would take revenge personally. And for the first time, Mary's father believed he was innocent, as he handed him a key that Mary had left him. Then Ike gave him back the cross that was his daughter's, but Mary's father took pity on him and returned it to him. When Ike put it on, his horns and burns disappeared immediately. Afterward, Ike went to the forest and used the key Mary left him to open a box they both kept in their treehouse. When he did so, he found a letter where she told him how much she loved him. However, she confessed to him that the only reason she did not accept to marry him was that she had the same type of cancer that took her mother, and she did not want to condemn Ike to see her suffer the agony of her illness. Now Ike understood everything, and after reading the letter, he decided to visit his brother, who was hospitalized, to ask him to take care of his parents, as he would go to take revenge on Lee for murdering his beloved. Then, Ike looked for Lee, who did not remember anything of what he had confessed, as he did it under the power of the horns. Then, he took him to the place where Mary died and confronted him to accept his crime, but Lee refused. At that moment, Terry and Mary's father, who now knew the whole truth, arrived there. The latter was armed and wanted to force Lee to go with the police. However, in one swift move, Lee wrestled the gun away from him and blew his head off. Ike, driven by anger, sought to stop Lee, so he took off Mary's cross and suddenly sprouted white wings, which were quickly consumed by fire. Afterward, Ike ended up turning into a demon, for revenge had drained him from the inside. Lee wounded Ike several times, but Ike defended himself by lunging at him, hurting him with his horns. Then, Ike stood next to him, to enjoy watching the snakes end his miserable life. And once Lee died, Ike, who was also wounded, fell to the ground, where he died in his brother's arms. At that point, Ike finally managed to free himself from the evil in his soul, and in this way, he was able to return to his beloved Mary, to a place where they would be happy forever.